This is Dead Serious, a show about short horror stories worthy of discussion. I'm Dead Palette, and I'm reading some Slenderman shit abductees. Today, at this non-moment in time, we're going to be taking a look at Breaking Sanity on Creepypasta.com. Link is in the description. I don't recommend going without ad block. Let's get right into the story that is rated 7.9 out of 10 according to 26 votes. Wonder how much of that has to do with the Slenderman. I look in the mirror and I wonder, when did this happen to me? I had stared at what I had become for over an hour now. These dramatic changes to my body and mental state, all of it began a year ago when my sister was taken by it. So our opening paragraph shows our protagonist, who we don't know what they look like, their age, gender, anything like that. They're standing in front of a mirror, contemplating what they've become. The implication being that there's a possibility that they might have become disfigured or monstrous in some manner. Maybe they are the Slenderman. We're left with some questions, but there's not a whole lot of personality to it. And I'm going to contrast that with another scene from horror that I think has a lot more personality coming right off the bat. At the beginning of Silent Hill 2, it starts out with the main character, James Sunderland, staring into a mirror. And as he's doing so, he says, "Mary, could you really be in this town?" And then he says, "I got a letter from," and it ends up that he's got a letter from his dead wife. We're immediately given insight into what the story is going to be about, and we're hooked because of the personality, the delivery, everything about it. But if you strip all of that away and just look purely at the text, "Mary, could you really be in this town?" That is telling us that there's a reason why Mary shouldn't be in the town. And that is a mystery that will intrigue us. We're going to want to know what happens next. That is what you should aspire to when you're opening your story. Something to really hook people in that manner. Get them to ask questions that are original and pertinent. And you got to do it quickly too. And that's a lot to take in. That's challenging. That's not easy. So even though I don't consider this to be a successful opening, because it's kind of boring, frankly, there's a lot to juggle there. It was a cold December night. I was 17, and my parents left me with my sister at her apartment so they could go to some Christmas adult party. Should be adult Christmas party. Everything was going fine. My sister and I stayed up watching horror movies, which, when I look back, was pretty ironic. After a while, I was getting bored and starting messing around with my hair. "Will you just cut your damn hair already, Tony? A guy's hair is not meant to be that long anyway." "Screw you, Tammy. It's my hair. I'll do what I want." She never did like the fact that I grew out my hair freshman year. She always told me to cut it. She thought because she was 2 years older than me, she could tell me what to do. I never held it against her, though. She was my sister after all. Or was, before she became Slenderman. No, I'm just joking. She stayed up until midnight, and that's when the end began for me. Nothing too out of place here. We stayed up until midnight, and that's when the end began for me. Not a fan of that. Front loading out the wazoo. We don't need to know that there's impending doom in that manner. I don't think that that's how you would structure this if you're really telling somebody. However, the idea that, the dynamic between Tony and Tammy here is working for me. We're getting that Tammy's kind of a bitch, but we don't want to say that because we lost her in some fashion and we're mourning her loss still. At midnight, the power went out in the middle of watching the original Evil Dead. And first, we weren't that freaked out about it. Then one of our neighbor's dogs, who never shuts up, suddenly stopped barking, followed by a faint whimper. At this point, we were becoming concerned and trying not to let our paranoia get the better of us. After several moments of dead silence, we hear a racket from the kitchen. It makes us both jump. Of course, it's her stupid cat, Mittens. We awkwardly chuckle about it. Then we heard a scream from down the hall, which makes our hair stand up on the back of our necks, especially mine, because I'm a fucking hippie, because it didn't sound like human. It didn't sound human. Then the lights started flickering on and off, becoming more rapid and rapid. Then the flickering became violent, and we heard whispers. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it felt like they were looking for something or someone. It's important not to get logically ahead of yourself here. So we know obviously something is amiss. It's not going to be, we know it's Slenderman, but we're going to take that out of the equation and just read this blind. Bearing that in mind, a dog stops making noise that normally makes noise. Why are you assuming that it's something other than a coyote or a skunk or any number of wildlife animals that could possibly hurt a dog? It's not your dog. You don't have any emotional attachment to that dog. Fuck that dog. There's no reason to think that you are in danger in that scenario. Now, obviously, the blinking lights and everything like that, that's a quick lead up. It's a short story, but that's pretty abrupt. That said, why are we attributing to this, these random voices that there is some sort of intention to find someone? I don't know what whispering would sound like if it's trying to find someone and I can't make out what is being said. Pressing on, we both started to panic, so we backed up into a corner as far away from the door as we could. Then there came this sound, a ringing that just started to drill through my head. I held my ears trying to shut it out, but it didn't help at all. It was like it was coming from inside of my own head. Then, finally, we see an ominous shadow come from beneath the door, with the ringing noise seemingly getting louder. I did my best to hold in my searing pain, but it seemed like it was going to best me. Before I could find out, my sister was the first to crack as she let out a piercing scream. As she did so, the door flew off its hinges to reveal a man, a tall, thin man who seemed to be in front of a blinding light. It was Jesus. All of this described well. Again, quick lead up, and that's the benefit of the things like Marble Hornets and Everyman hybrids. You get tons of time to get acquainted to the characters, and Slenderman is in the background. Same thing with the Slender blog stuff, where it's a slower build-up. There's more time to get acclimated to the characters, so then something, goes amiss. You have the grounding there to support that. This is a pretty ridiculous thing, but in that context, this would be functioning perfectly fine. As we stare at this man, the ringing had stopped. It was dead silent. As I looked at him, I could only see that his face was as pale as the moon. The ringing was so aggravating it blurred my vision, and the light was so bright. Yet, when we saw this man, he looked more of an entity. There was no way it was human. As he stood there in the doorway, staring at us, we were caught in awe. My sister stood up and moved towards the figure. I tried to reach to grab her, but I was in too much shock to move. The figure seemed to slide towards my sister with its arms outstretched with the intent to embrace her. I never forget what happened next at that moment. Grammatical errors here and there, but overall the writing is flowing well. Not a whole lot to say about this. I do like the ringing in the head. That echoes what we know about Slenderman. The treatment of the actual reveal of, dude, it's Slenderman, is not played up for fan service, as it is in a lot of these kinds of stories. It's kind of just stated plainly and given plausible deniability in the head of the person who is saying it. I don't like the whole, seem like an entity thing. Say it seemed inhuman and something like that, rather than saying that it's an entity, because that's what we like to call Slenderman. But the phrasing of his outstretched arms with the intent to embrace her. That makes sense, and we have a good idea of what's going to happen next. One moment, she was there, standing in front of the tall man. Then came a flash of light, and she was gone. But it was still there. It stared at me as I was curled in fear in the corner from what I had witnessed. My vision cleared, and I saw this thing had no face, no eyes, no mouth, no nose, nothing. After a short while, I began to hear whispers again, and I knew where they were coming from. This creature, it continued still to stare at me. Oh man, that line appears in all of these things of like, he's staring at me even though he doesn't have any eyes. Isn't that crazy? It's like, I suppose we have to say that because that's the feeling that it imparts, and I get that, but it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, because that's how a person would phrase it. It's like it was staring at me even though it didn't have eyes. But there's only so many times you can hear that before you get annoyed. And the existence of whispers coming from this thing is also frustrating because that's never been an established part of the Slenderman mythos. But anyway, as I looked back into its face, the ringing started coming back, but also something else, a feeling, and this feeling enraged me. All right, I can see where this is going. Finally, I could take it no longer. What did you do with her? I screamed at it. Where is she? But to no avail. It continued to just stare as if it were intrigued by me. As it continued to do so, a terrible feeling was growing into my chest. It was becoming unbearable. Give her back to me, I commanded it, but it continued to stare. All the while, the feeling continued growing in my chest, the ringing getting louder, the lights began flickering again, and I could feel my superpowers overtaking me. I was being imbued with proxy powers. Whispering growing faster. I could not stand it anymore. I picked up a fallen lamp and threw it at the tall, thin man, an action I wish I could take back. As the lamp made contact with him, he immediately dissipated away, which seemed to have made all the lights in the room and out in the hall short-circuit. The ringing in my ears blows up, causing me to pass out. So we can check off both attacking what is clearly a being that is invulnerable and passing out to our Slenderman story bingo. Again, nothing about this is wrong per se. All of it would make sense, but it's so bare bones. It's always focused around Slenderman, and we never... In these stories, it's really frustrating because we're not getting the character focus. People ended up being in love with the characters from Marble Hornets and the other Slenderman things of lesser quality, frankly. But you get to know the characters, and then Slenderman is an aspect of it that drives the plot forward. Here, Slenderman is the plot. So we get that we're being enraged, and the title of the story is Breaking Sanity. So I'm assuming we're going to become a proxy of some kind. The next thing I know, I wake up in an ER bedroom. Wonder if we're going to read any other stories where someone wakes up in an ER bedroom with my mother sleeping in a chair and surrounded by get well cards and balloons. My mother woke up around the same time my father had gotten there. They explained everything as best they could to me. The police had assumed a serial killer managed to cut the lights out in my apartment and kill all the security cam feeds. So are we living in like some high security mansion or something with a bunch of security cameras? If you're going to mention that all into the apartment complex and killed all the security, okay, that makes more sense. I'm illiterate. I wonder if we're going to read any other stories where people assume that there is a serial killer that is doing the work of Slenderman instead of Slenderman himself. Then he made his way to our floor, where the police found several mutilated bodies of people and a dog. In several of the victims' rooms, there was a circle shape on the wall, filled in with a large X. They don't say what it was written in, but I'm going to assume blood. When in doubt, just assume it was blood. This doesn't sound like the behavior of Slenderman. Like, that is some rake shit right there. The rake is the kind of monster that'll mutilate bodies and kill dogs and shit. Slenderman seems like a particularly bloodless kind of killer. In fact, it seems that in the most popular depictions of Slenderman, he doesn't kill people. He makes them disappear. He takes them to some sort of pocket dimension. He does that kind of shit. Not taking people and killing them and mutilating dogs. And if you're going to take this character and use it, then you have to treat it with care. You have to be careful about how you're portraying this character that people care about, especially if it's like something that's supposed to be taken with reverence, like Slenderman. And I'm not talking about something like, oh, I'm going to make a comic book where SpongeBob and Sandy fuck or something. That's obviously silly, but people want to take Slenderman seriously, you know? The next thing I know, I can read. I had been out for 2 weeks following the incident because 2 weeks is a nice round number that tells you the severity of the situation. And I was the only survivor on the floor the serial killer had visited. My parents told me that the police would want to interview me on what happened and that they'd be here shortly. Until then, I was to eat some breakfast and try my best to rest, which was easier said than done. They only took my weight and height, which was 150 pounds and 5 feet 8 inches. That is seemingly random, because the rest of the story is not detail-oriented at all. And then, this far into the story, they're just like, I weighed 150 pounds. Like, is that going to be plot relevant at some point? I was eating breakfast. I had a weird familiar sensation. As I was eating breakfast, I had a weird familiar sensation, that feeling groping my chest as if something was trying to get out of me. I assumed I had to throw up, so I went to the restroom. As I stood there in the ER bathroom, I took the bandages off my face, and I saw that I was Jeff the Killer. I stared at myself in the mirror and noticed I was pretty pale. I was sick with what I saw, too. All I could think about was how I let my sister be taken by that thing. After several minutes in the bathroom, I managed to throw up, although it didn't really make me feel any better. In fact, I could almost hear those haunting whispers at the back of my head again, and a faint ringing. So here's my most direct, clear, concise advice about this story. Get rid of the whispers. Just have it be ringing. The ringing is serving the same purpose, and it's not inconsistent with Slenderman. As I was being interviewed by the police, I told them everything I remembered. I told them about the thin man that did not seem at all human, and how my sister vanished in a blinding light. Of course, they didn't believe me, a distressed teenager, and recommended my parents take me to a therapist because I was showing signs of post-traumatic stress. As they did so, and the therapist I saw did her best to help. I can't remember her name. After a while, I stopped trying to convince others of what I saw. They just refused to believe something unbelievable, as ironic as that sounds. That is not ironic at all. Man, that is a pet peeve of mine, is people not understanding how to use the word ironic. It is fitting that people wouldn't believe something that's unbelievable. Life never moved on for me since then. I would always have those nightmares of that creature. I would dream about it in the apartment again, staring at the creature, screaming at it. Only I wasn't screaming what I said in the apartment. Instead, I was asking it, "What are you?" Only to hear those haunting whispers digging into my brain. Every time I have that dream, I wake up sweating, go to the bathroom and wash my face, stare myself in the mirror, and remember what that godforsaken ringing. 3 months after my sister's disappearance, I decided I was ready to go back to school. Only I wasn't ready. All my friends barely recognized me because I was becoming so pale. When lunch came around, I was almost always too depressed and disgusted with myself to even eat. I was talking less and less, and my friends were becoming concerned for me. I didn't care, though. I was becoming detached from the world around me. I don't want to say my expectations are low, but what we're having here is a nice build-up for something that I think the author isn't intending. What if, instead of going down the road of making things more paranormal, instead wean off the paranormal activity in the story and the Slenderman-based stuff and just deal with what would happen in that scenario. If you saw something unbelievable, no one believed you, and in that scenario, you dealt with seeing your sister being taken from you. He went to a therapist to deal with post-traumatic stress, and his only concern was to convince her that this thing was real. But what he is missing is that he is probably, regardless of that, going through post-traumatic stress. He is probably still dealing with the emotions of being helplessness, of the helplessness, not being able to save his sister, feeling regret that he didn't do more, even though he clearly couldn't do anything. And that is classical symptoms of survivor's guilt. He feels bad that he was the sibling that was left behind, and he's asking questions about, what are you? But the real question to him is, why did you take her and not me? There are all these kinds of questions that are floating around, these kind of nihilistic thoughts that you're having where you're getting depressed and you're not eating and all of these things coalescing. What if instead of going down the road of making this more paranormal, a day comes when the Slenderman is asking for our protagonist here, Tony, to do something, not words-wise, but asking him to do something with the rage inside of him, but instead he just feels empty and goes the other way, kills himself, succumbs to depression in some manner. That would almost be anticlimactic, but I think it's a more human story. That's what I'm putting forward. I don't think our narrator does that, and I don't want to, our author is going to do that, and I don't want to assume what their intentions are. But I think that would be an interesting route to go down. But let's press on. Then came that awful day that I wish had never happened. A no good, very bad day. But I knew would. As I was sitting out in the halls during lunch by myself, the wind started to rustle. I didn't pay much attention to it. I was too busy writing in my journal, a method for relaxation my therapist told me to do. All of a sudden, that vile ringing came back to me, and was giving me a migraine. I stood up to go get some water, but before I could do so, I froze in place at what I saw. At the end of the hall, peeking from behind a corner, I saw him, the Slenderman, as the authorities started calling him. So police and maybe the FBI know about the existence of Slenderman in this story. Before I can properly register what I saw, I blinked one time and that thing disappeared. I rubbed my eyes to make sure I'm not seeing things, and as I put my hands down, he is still nowhere to be seen. The ringing dies a little, but it's not completely gone, so I rush to the bathroom, turn on the faucet to wash my face. I start telling myself, it wasn't real, he wasn't there, he isn't real. As I continue, the ringing starts to fade, and I turn off the water, then dry my face with my shirt. When I finally manage to look up in the mirror, to my horror, instead of seeing my pale, sickly face, I see the Slenderman's. I quickly jump back in shock, but as I take another look at the mirror, I see that he is gone yet again. I want you, not me, I want you to go into the comments right now and tell me what you think about that most recent passage and whether that scene is effective or not. I'm not going to render my judgment because honestly, I'm a little conflicted. Convince me of your position down in the comments below. Thank you. The ringing came back excruciatingly loud, but did not bother me because that groping feeling in my chest had returned. In blind rage, I broke the mirror screaming, "You're not real, you're not real, you're not real." Sharp, jagged pieces of the mirror fall onto the floor. I pick one up, slash my hand, and write this over and over on the walls. Several minutes later, one of my friends finds me passed out. Oh my god, passed out again. An ambulance is called for me. I wake up again in an ER bed. Okay. So I said, hey, wonder if I'm going to read another story like this, where someone passes out and wakes up in a hospital bed with their parents around them. Not another story, it turns out. No, within the same story it happens. Jesus Christ. Obviously this is ridiculous and dramatic, and I really hope you left a comment about what you thought about that scene before the whole "you're not real" thing and the slashing your hand and writing in blood, because that's going to be interesting. I think we can say that the bed shitting has happened now. This time I was only there a few days. I see the stitches on my hand and think, crap, I tried getting up, but losing so much blood made me woozy. After a while, a psychiatrist came to diagnose me. I told him what I had seen, and he brands me with schizophrenia. Hey, that's a sensible thing. If you're seeing Slenderman, you have schizophrenia. He also tells me that my hallucinogens are only as real as I let them be. Hallucinogens. That is the best typo. My hallucinogens are only as real as I want them to be. So if I think that I have a handful of peyote, then I will have a handful of peyote. The more I'm being told I'm crazy, the more I'm actually believing it. He was also concerned with my weight issue. Apparently I had gone from a healthy 155 to an alarming 110, and had the neglected physique to prove it. My ribs were beginning to show. On the bright side, though, I had grown 3 inches. I just thought, whoop-de-fucking-do. So the weight and height did come into play, because we are turning into Slenderman. Incredible. Incredible. I stayed home for the rest of the school year, but that didn't really help much. I still wasn't eating, and I was still seeing the Slenderman in my dreams and in real life. It came to a point where I was too scared to even sleep. When I did, it was still the same dream, only at that point, when I wake up, I saw how distraught I was with everything going on. When I didn't sleep, I see a figure out my window at the bus stop, at the street corner, or even on the patio. I knew it was him, no matter what anyone else at this point. No matter what anyone else said at this point, I knew it was him. Sorry about that. It was the 10th month after the Slenderman took my sister. I was at home feeling sick again and had come down with a fever. I was extremely hot for some reason. I thought maybe the AC was off. Shortly enough, I got that feeling in my chest again. So I run into the bathroom to throw up. I'm there for several minutes and nothing comes out, but that feeling just became more intense, and it seemed like it was getting hotter. I looked in the mirror. I barely noticed the ringing that's been there since the feeling came, and it causes me to become agitated. I finally can't take the heat anymore. I open the mirror cabinet and get out my dad's shaver. I turn it on and let it loose on my sweat-soaked hair. It doesn't make it any better. The feeling stayed with me. So maybe that's the experience of being Slenderman. You get so hot that you just need to shave your head. A few days after that, it was the annual height measurement my mom would do with my sister and me. I couldn't believe she actually wanted to do this. When I looked in her eyes, though, I could see that she needed to do this to help her get through the pain she's been in, the pain we both been in. As distasteful as it was at the time, I complied. When she lit up at seeing I was now 6'2", it was almost worth the painful memories brought back up. I knew she meant well, though. That is a nice way to give the detail that you're getting taller. That makes us care for the mother. I wish we knew a little bit more about the mother, but that is a gut-wrenching thing, you know? Now it's been a full year since Slenderman took her from me. Last night was my last night of sleep. After having the same dream for the umpteenth time, I finally understood those haunting whispers from that day. As I look in the mirror, today, on the anniversary of my sister's death, I do not hear ringing. I hear the laughter of children. So there's like weird tense things that are going on throughout this story. It's kind of a hard thing to get a grasp on, honestly, but there could be resolved in some way. I don't like the whole thing about whispers, but the detail of like I hear the laughter of children. Makes sense somewhat because Slenderman is associated with abducting children, so maybe he has a bunch of children in the Slenderman pocket dimension or something. That makes somewhat sense, but I don't like the establishment of now there are whispers coming from Slenderman. Today we went to a memorial service in honor of my sister. As I looked at my suit and red tie, my mother comes into my petty visage. Okay. The only compliment she could give was how remarkably tall I had gotten in the past year, but I could see the pain in her eyes. Not only did she lose one child, but she was losing another to depression and insanity. I was pale as ash and as thin as a skeleton at this point. So he's got a red tie because he's turning into Slenderman, but the question here is, what do you prefer? Slenderman with black tie? Slenderman with a red tie? Let me know about that. At @DeadPallet on Twitter. Just hit me up and say this is the correct way that you depict Slenderman. As I return to the bathroom one final time to look myself in the mirror, I hear laughs of my sister and I see in the mirror. What I see in the mirror horrifies me. I go back into the room and get a piece of paper and a pencil to write down what the whispers said to me. I'm doing this because I'm tired and because I don't think I'm waking up. Hopefully I'm going to be with my sister. I understand now that on that night when the Slenderman took my sister, it did something to me. It chose me and I want people to know what it told me before I lose myself. Oh my god. This is written in all caps. We were conceived by the sins of man, born in their anger and hatred, given shape by their fears and paranoia. So now, there's not a slender man, there are slender men. Credited to Rico Frico. I hope if you are a young writer, you got something out of this, a better understanding of how to write stories. Definitely check out the comments below to get some feedback for the story as well. We're going to take this as an example. I'm going to leave you with one comment from Creepypasta.com by Orange Lamp. Again, if you click that link down below, make sure you have ad block on. But Orange Lamp says, I like your story, but I think you need to play to your genre. Give us some suspense. It needs more detail and description. Great job, though. The ending is nice. Well said, Orange Lamp. I think that is some nice, positive, constructive feedback. Now, if you enjoyed that, consider helping out the community and supporting my channel. You can support the community by conversing in the comments below and going to creativehorror.com. That's creativehorror.com for more horror-based podcasts like Darkly Lit, a monthly podcast that delves into horror literature, like an online book club. Each month they read a different short novel, graphic novel, or publicly available online story. You can follow me on Twitter and Tumblr down below in the description. Thank you so much for your time, and now on to our sponsor at this non-moment in time. Der Ritter. Der Ritter, the only woodblock print your children know.